Welcome to our extended coverage of the Noor Salman trial here on ClickOrlando.com. I'm Justin Mormouth. The sixth day of jury selection began just a few hours ago. The judge hopes to have 60 potential jurors by tomorrow before dropping that number to 12. Right now, a little bit more than 40 people are in that pool. About 80 of the 600 people summoned have been questioned. Let's get out to News 6's Nadine Yanis live at the federal courthouse in downtown Orlando. And Nadine, you've been in court for much of this trial, and pretrial publicity appears to be having an impact on jury selection.
And this is something we have seen over the last 6 days of jury selection, Justin. Again, you mentioned it. We're about 2/3 of the way there. Judge Paul Byron wanting to get to 60 jurors in that pool by tomorrow afternoon. But like you said, so many jurors today have already been dismissed just before lunch. 3 of them for saying that they have already formed an opinion that Noor Salman somehow was involved. So let's take a look. Out of the 8 jurors called today, 6 were dismissed for various reasons. But like I mentioned, many of them, 3 of them just in the last hour or so, saying they've just seen too much news and simply could not be fair to Salman during this trial. One juror telling the judge, quote, "From the stories I've read, I have reason to believe that she has already been involved." And Justin, this is exactly the reason why the judge had summoned 650 potential jurors to come back. We've already questioned about 80 of them. We have 44 in the pool. We got to get to that magic number of 60.
And Nadine, not only that, but one of the jurors was dismissed this morning because they were showing bias surrounding the LGBTQ community, right?
Yeah, and we've seen a lot of different reasons for jurors to be dismissed based on biases they've had, maybe against the Muslim community or against Noor Salman herself. But a theme that we've seen just this morning and late yesterday was about people having connections to the LGBT community. For example, the first juror that took the stand today, if you take a look, she answered all the questions right. It seemed to be a great potential juror for the defense. She had a lot of Muslim friends, and she was a scientist. She could think methodically. She did clinical research, she said. But then right at the end, she said that she had a family member that was a part of the LGBT community and that she just could not be unbiased in this case, which is very interesting because this comes just days after the defense filed a motion on Monday asking the judge to not let the government say that this was an attack on the gay community. The judge in court saying today that this is a case about terrorism and not a case about an attack on the gay community, which, Justin, I have to say is interesting that this question, one of the jurors says, wasn't even on the questionnaire, that they weren't even asked about a potential bias because it was a gay nightclub that was attacked. However, we are seeing that bias come up, and 2 jurors so far have been dismissed because of it.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, Nadine. And in fact, we're going to be asking our legal analyst now about more when it comes to that and some of the reasoning some of these jurors are seeing and wanting to get out of this. And let's bring in News 6 legal analyst Rick Jancha now. And Rick, thank you so much for being here. You just heard Nadine talk about this. They're not saying, according to the court, that this was an attack on the gay community. However, that juror was dismissed because of that. Your take on that?
Well, because so many of the victims were part of that community, you know, that's the concern. You know, I guess the majority of the victims there were part of the, LGBTQ community. So even though we're now learning from what appears to be from defense filings that that community was not attacked because of that, still the victims and the place that was attacked has those overtones to it. So that's why they're still very concerned about that, even though new evidence is coming out that it may not have been the primary focus of the attack.
And this just goes back to why they have so many people in that have been summoned for this, because if anyone has any sort of bias, they just say, okay, excused, and we'll bring on the next person until they get to that 60 that they need to move on into the jury pool. Again, 2 out of 7 only moved in today, and we're seeing a lot of the pretrial publicity, which we knew was going to happen.
Yes, and I think Judge Byron's anticipation and hope of getting a jury by Friday may not quite work out, because yesterday in the morning 5 jurors were seated. Today only 2 this morning, so that shows that the process is slowing down a little bit, and maybe more potential jurors are becoming more attuned, to publicity and what's actually transpiring.
I want to go back to the motion that Nadine mentioned. You know, it happened on Monday. That motion comes down from the defense. It was a startling revelation as far as this trial is concerned, especially the fact that it came out during, jury selection. How will the defense use this as they try to get Noor Salman off?
Well, in reality, the main evidence that the government has against Noor Salman is her own statement. Mm-hmm. And the timeline submitted by the defense indicates that some of the statements she made about being with Mateen at certain locations, the forensic evidence based on cell towers and GPS locations doesn't jive with her confession. So that adds to their argument that any statement she made, it was a false confession based upon pressure of being questioned for so long by the FBI.
And you've read the motion, you've seen it, you've seen the timeline of it, and we were talking earlier, and it seems that Pulse was not maybe the #1 target according to this document. Maybe it was Disney Springs.
Absolutely. According to the document filed, if you accept that forensic evidence as accurate, Disney Springs was the target. Mm-hmm. Mr. Mateen arrived there around 10 p.m., went into Disney Springs. He's picked up on surveillance. He Googled while there Disney Springs and Disney World, and it wasn't until like 12:21, almost 2.5 hours later, where he was located near Epcot Center, that he actually Googled downtown nightclubs. Mm-hmm. And from that and his mode of travel and where he went, it looks like Pulse might have been the third potential target. Mm-hmm. Because there was the bar Eve that he Googled, because when he Googled two downtown bars, Eve and Pulse came up. Mm-hmm. He first went by Eve, stayed there roughly 5-10 minutes, but then went down to Pulse.
Saw the law enforcement present outside as well.
Yes.
I think that was another factor as far as why he left Disney Springs, according to that document as well.
Oh, it speaks highly for Disney's security and the visibility of their security, that he spent 2.5 hours and deemed it not a safe place or as good a place for him to go.
So once this jury is seated and we get through this whole process, and we've already seen this new revelation as far as this document is concerned, is this just the tip of the iceberg, do you think, as far as new information from both sides? Are we going to find out a lot about what we don't know already?
I think so. And what this filing reveals is maybe the potential jurors should be questioned about connections to Disney and workers there, which I don't believe any of that has been brought up until just the filing of this motion on Monday. Mm-hmm. So that may be a whole nother inquiry when they get the 60 of the jurors to try to then whittle it down also.
So 44 out of the 60, again, have been selected into that jury pool. Once we move past, this, I don't even know what we want to call it, pre-jury selection, because it's not quite, they're just dismissing jurors at this point. They're not selecting jurors at this point. Once we get into the next round of questioning, when all of them are in the courtroom at the same time, how will they go through and try to whittle down and get that final 12 of who they think should be seated?
Well, I'm sure their jury consultants have already told them what they believe to be the ideal jury, not only for the juror, for the prosecution and for the defense. Mm-hmm. And they're going to work off that mode. And a lot of it in jury selection is gut feeling. Mm-hmm. It's what the attorneys think and how they respond.
And I know you've been in the courtroom, and I do want to bring up these images here, these sketches that we have been receiving from our sketch artist. How would you compare, what she looks like in court, you've seen her in person, to what those sketches look like? Is that an accurate depiction of her as she goes through and listens to these questions being asked to these prospective jurors?
I don't think so. I mean, they can't adequately, a sketch can't capture her mood and changes in appearance during the day. Just like the second day of trial, she was very upbeat, very involved, very positive. Yesterday, she seemed more downtrodden, more depressed, and not as actively involved in the selection process. So emotionally, I think it's and physically, it's probably wearing on her.
And we're just getting started too.
Yeah, no drawing can pick that up.
Right. It's a difficult job.
It is.
Yeah, no doubt about that. All right, Rick, thank you so much for being here this afternoon, and breaking down some of these new developments that we've seen in court. Now, because, again, of this federal trial, no cameras or recording devices are permitted inside the courtroom. News 6 and Click Orlando, though, will have reporters at that trial every day. We have a special page. Of course, you're there right now detailing everything that happens. Just look for the Noor Salman tab. Now, join us again tonight at 6:30 for another discussion with News 6 anchor Matt Austin, investigator Louis Bolden, and legal analyst Whitney Bone. You can watch that live again right here on clickorlando.com/Noor Salman trial. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I'm Justin Mormith. Take care.